The first time Jake said, "Yeah, that rule doesn't really apply to me," the entire office went quiet. Not loud quiet, not dramatic quiet, just that subtle Australian kind of quiet where everyone keeps typing, but they're definitely listening. Jake had only been in Sydney for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And somehow, he had already decided that Australian work rules were more like suggestions. Back home in the United States, he was a high-performing sales manager. Fast promotions. Big commissions. Hustle culture. He believed rules bent for top performers, and in his mind, Australia was just a smaller, sunnier version of America. Same language, same ambition, just with better beaches. What he didn't realize was that Australian work culture plays by an entirely different rulebook. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, please subscribe, like my video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. Jake moved to Australia after landing a job offer from a growing tech company in Melbourne. He told everyone back home he was taking over the Asia-Pacific market. He pictured corner offices, aggressive targets, late-night strategy calls, and climbing the ladder fast. On his first day, he walked in at 7:30 a.m. sharp. The office lights were barely on. People slowly trickled in around 9, some even later. By 5 p.m., desks were empty. Jake was confused. In America, staying late meant dedication. In Australia, leaving on time meant balance. He laughed it off at first. They'll catch up, he thought. Once they see how I work. Paid leave, 4 full weeks of annual leave, mandatory, plus sick leave, plus public holidays, plus something called long service leave. Jake actually asked HR if that was a typo. It wasn't. Under Australian workplace rights, employees are protected. Strongly. The fair work system doesn't treat overtime like a badge of honor, it treats it like something that needs compensation. Jake thought, cool, but I won't need that. I'm here to grind. What he didn't realize was that in Australian work culture, grinding without boundaries isn't impressive. It's strange. The first real clash happened during a team meeting. The manager reminded everyone about compliance policies, overtime approval, and strict guidelines around workplace conduct. Jake raised his hand and said, half joking but fully serious, I mean, if I close $1 million deal, no one's going to complain if I bend a couple rules, right? Silence again. His manager smiled politely and said, that's not really how it works here. Jake chuckled. Sure, but results matter. His coworkers exchanged looks. In Australia, results matter. But fairness matters more. He started skipping required lunch breaks. In the US, working through lunch meant commitment. In Australia, managers can get into trouble if employees don't take proper breaks. One afternoon, HR called him in, not to congratulate him, to remind him he must take his breaks. Jake was stunned. You're telling me I have to stop working? HR calmly replied, yes, it's part of workplace health and safety. He left the room irritated. This place is too relaxed, he muttered. Then came the overtime situation. Jake stayed late several nights without approval, trying to prove himself. Payroll automatically flagged it. Instead of praise, he received an email stating overtime must be pre-approved and properly compensated under Australian work laws. Jake couldn't understand it. In America, unpaid extra effort often leads to promotions. In Australia, unpaid overtime can trigger compliance issues. He told a colleague, back home this kind of drive gets rewarded. His coworker replied, mate, here we work to live, not live to work. The cultural differences between the US and Australia go deeper than hours and policies. It's about hierarchy. Jake was used to addressing executives formally. In Australia, he was told to call the CEO by his first name. No titles, no ego, just Dave. The first time he tried pitching an aggressive growth plan, he used corporate buzzwords and intense delivery. When he finished, Dave nodded and said, yeah, nah, that's a bit much. Jake didn't even understand the phrase. Was it yes? Was it no? It was no, politely. But Jake still believed he was special. He believed being American gave him an edge. He openly compared systems. In the States, we move faster. In the States, we don't need this much regulation. In the States, high performers get exceptions. Every comment chipped away at team morale. Australians don't respond well to arrogance, especially foreign arrogance. The turning point came during a major contract negotiation. Jake bypassed a procedural step, assuming his confidence would smooth things over. Instead, it triggered a compliance review. The deal stalled. Senior leadership had to step in. Suddenly, the $1 million closer wasn't the hero. He was the risk. He expected a fiery confrontation. Instead, his manager calmly sat him down and said, "You're talented, but talent doesn't override policy here. The rules protect everyone, even you." That line stuck. Protect everyone, even you. Jake started observing more. He noticed coworkers actually used their annual leave. They came back refreshed, productive, loyal. He noticed managers genuinely checked on mental health. He noticed turnover was low. He noticed no one bragged about burnout. And strangely, the company was still growing, profitably. One afternoon, he asked a colleague why Australians care so much about work-life balance. She shrugged and said, "Because work isn't everything. Simple, obvious." But radical to him, the real humbling moment came months later. A junior employee reminded Jake to log his hours properly to comply with Fair Work Australia regulations. Months earlier, he would have laughed. This time, he thanked her. He realized something uncomfortable. He wasn't special. He was just uninformed. Americans working in Australia often assume cultural similarities mean identical systems. But workplace rights in Australia are deeply structured. Minimum wage protections, overtime rules, paid leave mandates. They're not optional. They're foundational. The system doesn't revolve around exceptional individuals. It revolves around fairness. Jake stopped trying to be the loudest in the room. He stopped comparing constantly. He started asking questions instead of making assumptions. He still performed well. He still closed deals. But he did it within the framework. And surprisingly, he felt less pressure. One evening, he left the office at 5 p.m. sharp. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He met coworkers for drinks. They laughed about cultural misunderstandings. Someone joked, "You thought you were above the rules, didn't you?" He smiled. "Yeah, I did." The truth is, moving abroad doesn't automatically elevate your status. Being American doesn't override Australian work culture, and believing you're special enough to bypass workplace laws can backfire fast. In Australia, fairness beats ego, systems beat swagger, and balance beats burnout. By the end of his first year, Jake wasn't the outsider trying to reshape the system. He was part of it. Still ambitious, still driven, but aligned. And ironically, that's when he got promoted. Not for breaking rules, but for respecting them. Because here's the twist nobody tells you. Sometimes the rules you think are limiting you are actually protecting you. And sometimes the place you think is too relaxed is simply more evolved in how it defines success. And that realization, that hit harder than any compliance email ever could. Just when Jake thought he had fully adapted, another American joined the company. Fresh off the plane, confident, loud, calling Australia America Light. Jake saw his old self immediately. During orientation, the newcomer whispered, "So how strict are these policies really?" Jake paused. Months ago, he would have winked and said, "Depends how good you are." Instead, he replied, "Strict enough to matter." Watching someone else repeat his early mistakes was surreal. The skipped breaks, the overtime bravado, the subtle superiority. This time, Jake stepped in early, not to lecture, but to explain. It's different here. And that's when he realized the biggest shift hadn't been in his work habits, it had been in his mindset. He no longer saw Australian work laws as obstacles, he saw them as guardrails. The culture didn't suppress ambition, it reshaped it. Sometimes growth doesn't come from dominating a system, it comes from understanding it. Just when Jake thought he had fully adjusted to Australian work culture, the real test came from somewhere he didn't expect: performance review season. Back in the United States, performance reviews meant one thing: numbers, close more deals, bring in revenue, outperform your peers. That's it. But in Australia, the review included something Jake had never seen weighted so heavily before: team contribution and cultural alignment. When his manager walked him through the evaluation, the numbers were strong, very strong. But there was a pause before the final rating. "Your results are excellent," his manager said calmly, "but we also value how people operate within the team and respect workplace frameworks." Months ago, that comment would have frustrated him. Now, it hit differently. It wasn't about limiting high performers, it was about sustainability. At the same time, the new American hire, confident, outspoken, and openly dismissive of Australian work laws, started making the same mistakes Jake once did. He joked about minimum wage protections. He rolled his eyes at mandatory leave. He even said during a meeting, "Back home, we just push through and fix it later. The room die."